Ethan Walker's routine day as a mailman took a harrowing turn when his sharp instincts uncovered a sinister truth lurking behind the picture-perfect facade of a quiet suburban street. As Ethan stood on the witness stand, the courtroom buzzed with tension. The defense attorney's piercing questions sought to undermine his credibility, painting him as an untrained outsider meddling in family matters. Yet Ethan's calm resolve and steadfast gaze told a different story. A man who had seen too much to stay silent. Across the aisle, Emily Harper clung to her daughter Mia, her trembling hands betraying the hope she desperately clung to. Each piece of evidence laid bare the horrors of Daniel Harper's actions, but it was Ethan's unwavering courage that turned the tide. The verdict, when it came, would ripple far beyond the courtroom, forever changing the lives entangled in this tale of abuse, bravery, and redemption. Before we journey further into this unforgettable story, make sure you're subscribed to Epic Story Moments. Hit that bell icon now so you never miss an incredible tale. Join our community by liking, sharing, and commenting to keep these heartwarming stories coming. And hey, tell us where you're watching from. We love connecting with you all. Ethan Walker tightened his grip on the steering wheel of his postal van, the hum of the engine drowned out by his mounting frustration. Glancing at the clock, 9:47 a.m., he let out a sigh. A rare delay on his meticulously planned route nagged at his disciplined mind. For a man who prided himself on precision, a traffic accident throwing his schedule off was nothing short of a disruption to the order he cherished. The Willowbrook neighborhood, with its immaculate lawns and tree-lined streets, came into view. To most, it was the epitome of suburban perfection. But Ethan, having delivered mail here for years, had learned not to trust appearances. He had witnessed the cracks beneath the polished facades, arguments overheard through open windows, tear-streaked faces quickly concealed behind drawn curtains, and once, a hurried eviction leaving nothing but silence in its wake. Today, however, it wasn't just the houses that felt off. As he pulled up to the Harper residence, his eyes landed on Mia Harper, the family's 8-year-old daughter. Normally, Mia was a bundle of joy, either chasing her playful terrier or pedaling her bike up and down the driveway, her laughter filling the air like music. But today, she sat slumped on the porch steps, her small frame curled tightly as if shielding herself from an unseen storm. Her blue sundress was wrinkled, her dark curls tangled as if she had barely slept. Ethan's chest tightened at the sight. "Hey, Mia," he called gently as he stepped out of the van, slinging his mailbag over his shoulder. "How's it going, kiddo?" Mia startled, her wide eyes locking onto him with a flicker of hesitation. "Hi, Mr. Ethan," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. "You waiting for a package today?" he asked, keeping his tone light. She shook her head, glancing at the bundle of mail in his hands. "No, just waiting for Mom," she replied, her small fingers twisting the hem of her dress nervously. Ethan noticed the faint bluish marks on her forearm. Bruises. His heart sank, but he forced himself to keep his demeanor calm. "You doing okay, Mia? You seem quieter than usual." She nodded quickly, her curls bouncing with the motion. "I'm fine," she whispered, but her trembling hands and downcast eyes told another story. Ethan crouched to her level, his voice soft yet firm. "You know, if there's ever something bothering you, you can tell me, right?" Mia offered a quick, almost robotic nod, grabbing the letters he handed her before bolting back into the house without another word. Ethan's gaze lingered on the Harper home. The drawn curtains and eerie silence felt suffocating, a stark contrast to the warmth he was used to from Mia's mother, Emily. Something wasn't right. Returning to his van, Ethan started the engine but hesitated. His instincts told him to let it go. Kids get bruises all the time, he reasoned, but the image of Mia's haunted eyes gnawed at him. Shaking his head, he muttered, "Focus, Ethan. You've got a job to do." Yet, as he continued his route, the tension in his chest only grew. Later that morning, Ethan was halfway through his deliveries when the sound of rapid footsteps made him turn. His heart lurched as he saw Mia racing toward him, tears streaking her face. "Mr. Ethan," she cried, her voice breaking. "Please help me. My mom's hurt." Ethan crouched instantly, steadying her trembling form. "Mia, slow down. What happened?" "It's Daddy," she sobbed, clutching his arm with a desperate grip. "He got so mad. He hurt her. She's not moving. Please, Mr. Ethan, you have to help." Ethan froze, his mind racing. The terror in her voice was unmistakable, and the bruises on her arm now painted a much darker picture. He knew he couldn't ignore this. "Okay," he said firmly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Take me to your house. We'll make sure your mom's okay." Mia didn't hesitate. She grabbed his hand and led him down the street, her small legs pumping furiously. Ethan's stomach churned as they neared the house. The Harper residence, once a picture of suburban charm, now loomed like a fortress of secrets. Before they reached the door, a loud crash echoed from inside, followed by angry shouting. Ethan's breath hitched. Instincts told him to call for help and stay back, but the desperation in Mia's tear-streaked face urged him forward. The door slammed open, and Dennis Harper stormed out, his towering frame radiating fury. His eyes locked onto Ethan and Mia, his expression twisting with a dangerous mix of anger and disdain. "What the hell do you think you're doing here?" Dennis growled, his voice low and threatening. Ethan squared his shoulders, his pulse pounding. "I'm here to help," he said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. "Mia said her mom's hurt." Dennis took a step closer, his fists clenched. "This is none of your damn business. Leave. Now." Ethan glanced down at Mia, who clung to him like a lifeline. In that moment, he knew there was no turning back. "Not this time," Ethan replied, his voice firm. "I'm not leaving until I know she's safe." Dennis sneered but didn't respond, storming past them and down the street. The moment he was out of sight, Ethan rushed into the house with Mia. Inside, the scene was worse than he had feared. Emily Harper lay on the living room floor, barely conscious, her face bruised and her breathing shallow. Ethan's hands shook as he pulled out his phone to call for help, his mind racing with a mix of anger and determination. "You're going to be okay," he whispered to Emily as he waited for the ambulance, his voice resolute. "I promise," as the sirens grew louder in the distance. Ethan looked at Mia, who was clutching his arm with tear-filled eyes. He gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You're so brave, Mia," he said softly, "and I'm not going anywhere." In that moment, Ethan realized this was more than just a detour on his route. It was a call to action, a chance to make a difference in the lives of a family on the brink of despair, and he wasn't about to let them down. Dennis stormed out with such fury that he failed to notice Ethan and Mia standing frozen nearby. His focus was entirely on the red sedan parked in the driveway. Without hesitation, he yanked the door open, jumped in, and screeched away, the tires leaving dark streaks on the pavement. "Daddy's gone," Mia whispered, her voice trembling, a mix of relief and dread. Ethan's pulse raced as the house loomed before them, its front door ajar, revealing only darkness. "Mia," he said softly but firmly, "stay close to me, okay?" She nodded, clutching his hand tightly. As they approached, Ethan pushed the door open wider, the hinges groaning like a warning. Inside, the scene was one of devastation. The living room looked as if a storm had ripped through it. Furniture overturned, shattered picture frames scattered like broken memories, and fragments of a lamp lying in a sea of broken glass. The acrid stench of spilled alcohol hung heavily in the air, mingling with a faint metallic scent that set Ethan on edge. "Mom," Mia called out, her small voice wavering as her eyes darted around the chaotic room. Her gaze fell on a motionless figure sprawled on the rug. "Mommy," she screamed, breaking free from Ethan's hand and rushing forward. Emily Harper lay crumpled on the floor, her blonde hair matted with blood from a gash on her forehead. Bruises bloomed dark and angry across her swollen face. Ethan's breath caught, his mind racing as panic clawed at him. For a horrifying moment, He feared the worst. "Mia, wait," Ethan said, grabbing her before she could reach her mother. His voice softened, trying to mask his terror. "We need to be careful. Let me check. Okay?" He knelt beside Emily, his hands shaking as he assessed her injuries. She was unconscious but breathing, her chest rising and falling shallowly. Relief flooded him when he found a faint but steady pulse. "She's alive," he whispered, almost as if reassuring himself. Grabbing his phone, he dialed 911. The calm voice of the dispatcher grounded him as he relayed the details. "There's been an assault at 23 Willow Lane. The victim is unconscious, and her injuries are serious. The suspect fled in a red sedan heading west. Are you with the victim now?" the dispatcher asked. "Yes," Ethan replied, his eyes darting to Mia, who stood clutching her stuffed rabbit, trembling. "She's unconscious but breathing. Please, send help quickly." The dispatcher assured him help was on the way, and Ethan hung up. Turning to Mia, he crouched to her level, his voice gentle but firm. "Mia, it's going to be okay. The ambulance is coming. They're going to help your mom." Tears streamed down Mia's cheeks as she clutched her rabbit tighter. "I told her we should leave," she sobbed. "I told her Daddy would get mad again, but she said we'd be safe." Ethan's chest tightened at the weight of her words. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the fractured remnants of what was once a family home. Blood droplets trailed from the couch to the back door, a silent testimony of Emily's desperate attempt to escape. The holes in the drywall and the shattered vase near the window painted a grim picture of escalating violence. "How long has this been happening, Mia?" Ethan asked gently. Mia twisted the ears of her rabbit, her voice barely audible. "A long time. Mommy said it would stop after the divorce. But Daddy keeps coming back. He gets so mad when she says no." Her words were a dagger to Ethan's heart. Swallowing the anger threatening to boil over, he placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing by running for help. You're so brave, Mia. Your mom is lucky to have you." The faint sound of sirens grew louder, piercing the tense silence. Mia's tear-filled eyes widened with a glimmer of hope. "They're here," she whispered. Red and blue lights bathed the street in an eerie glow as police and paramedics arrived. Neighbors peeked through curtains or stepped onto their porches, their faces a mix of concern and curiosity. Ethan stood protectively by Mia, his arm around her trembling shoulders. She didn't flinch as officers moved past her, their radios crackling with updates, or when paramedics rushed into the house with a stretcher. "Mr. Ethan," Mia said, her voice small and trembling. "Is Mommy going to be okay?" Ethan crouched down, meeting her eyes with as much reassurance as he could muster. "She's in good hands now. The paramedics will take care of her, and I'll be right here with you. You're not alone." Mia nodded, her grip on the rabbit tightening. Moments later, the paramedics emerged, carefully carrying Emily on the stretcher. Her face was barely recognizable under the bruises, and her arm was strapped in an improvised sling. Blood still seeped faintly from the wound on her forehead. "Mommy," Mia cried, trying to run toward her. Ethan held her back gently but firmly. "Let them do their job," he said softly. "They're taking her to the hospital to get the help she needs." One of the paramedics, a kind-looking man with graying hair, paused to address Ethan. "She's stable for now, but she'll need immediate care. Are you family?" Ethan shook his head. "No, but I'll go with Mia. She can't stay here alone." The paramedic nodded. "There's room for both of you in the ambulance." In the ambulance, Mia curled up against Ethan, her rabbit clutched tightly to her chest. Her wide, frightened eyes never left her mother, who lay unconscious on the stretcher, hooked up to an 4 and a heart monitor. "I tried to stop him," Mia said suddenly, her voice a broken whisper. "I told him to leave Mommy alone, but he wouldn't listen." Ethan's chest tightened as he looked down at her. "You were very brave, Mia. You did everything you could." "When he drinks," she continued, her voice trembling, "he gets so mad." Mommy tried to leave with me this morning, but he found out. He got so angry. Ethan's jaw tightened, his emotions threatening to overwhelm him. He wrapped an arm around her, unsure of what else to say. Her small body shook with silent sobs as she buried her face in the rabbit. As the ambulance pulled into the hospital, the hum of fluorescent lights and the sterile smell of antiseptic greeted them. Ethan helped Mia climb down, her steps hesitant but determined. Together, they followed the paramedics inside, a glimmer of hope amid the chaos. The fluorescent lights above hummed faintly, casting a harsh, sterile glow that made the hospital corridors feel cold and unwelcoming. Ethan walked beside Mia, his presence a fragile tether as the little girl's world unraveled. She clutched her stuffed rabbit tightly, her knuckles pale against its worn fur. Nurses and patients moved past them, their faces etched with fatigue and pain, each carrying stories of their own, though none as immediate as the one unraveling before him. A nurse guided them to a waiting area, gesturing toward the stiff plastic chairs. But Mia refused to sit. She stood by the window instead, her tiny frame silhouetted against the glass, as she gazed out at the parking lot below. Her breath fogged the glass, a faint reminder of the life still burning inside her despite the chaos. Ethan stood nearby, giving her space but remaining close enough to comfort her if she needed it. The minutes stretched into eternity, each second heavy with unspoken fears. Finally, the sound of approaching footsteps broke the silence. Ethan turned to see a doctor walking toward them, his expression serious but not devoid of warmth. "Emily Harper?" the doctor asked, his voice steady but quiet, as though the weight of the news demanded reverence. Ethan nodded and gently placed a hand on Mia's shoulder, guiding her closer. The doctor crouched to meet Mia's eye level, his tone softening as he spoke. "Your mom's injuries are serious, but she's stable. She has a concussion, a dislocated shoulder, and several broken ribs. But she's a fighter, Mia. She's going to be okay." Mia's lip quivered, her eyes brimming with tears. "Can I see her?" she whispered, her voice trembling under the weight of her emotions. The doctor offered a kind smile. "Not just yet, sweetheart. She needs rest. But I promise you'll see her soon." Mia nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. Ethan's chest tightened at the sight. This little girl, holding on to fragile hope with a strength far beyond her years. Hours passed like slow-moving shadows, and when Mia was finally allowed into the room, Ethan followed her silently. Emily lay motionless in the hospital bed, her face bruised but serene in sleep. The rhythmic beeping of the monitors was a steady reminder that life still pulsed within her. Mia climbed into the chair beside her mother, clutching her hand as if willing her own strength into her. The sight was almost too much for Ethan to bear. He stepped into the hallway, leaning against the wall as the events of the day replayed in his mind like fragments of a bad dream. Mia's desperate plea outside the Harper house, the chaos of finding Emily unconscious on the floor, the tense ride to the hospital. It felt surreal, like a scene from a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. He thought about his job, the route he'd abandoned without a second thought. He had no idea what trouble awaited him at the depot, but none of it mattered. If he hadn't stopped to help Mia, who would have? The weight of what could have happened, of what might still happen, pressed down on him like a physical burden. As he turned back toward the room, Mia appeared in the doorway. Her rabbit dangled in one hand, and though her eyes were still red, she managed a small, fragile smile. "Thank you, Mr. Ethan," she said quietly, her voice carrying a depth of gratitude far beyond her years. The words hit him like a tidal wave, filling him with a mix of relief and humility. He crouched down, meeting her gaze. "You're welcome, Mia," he replied, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. As evening approached, Ethan knew he had to leave. He knelt beside Mia again, his tone gentle. "I have to go back to work now, but I'll check on you and your mom soon, okay?" Mia's fingers tightened around her mother's hand. "Will you really come back?" Ethan nodded firmly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Of course. I'll always be around if you need me." He turned and walked through the hospital's sterile halls, each step heavier than the last. Pushing open the doors, he stepped into the cool night air. The world outside was jarringly normal, a stark contrast to the turmoil he had just witnessed. He took a deep breath, steadying himself before heading back to his van. Driving through the darkened streets, Ethan's mind lingered on the fragility of the lives he encountered every day. Delivering mail had always seemed like a simple job, but today it reminded him of the stories hidden behind every door. The Harpers weren't the only ones in Willowbrook carrying untold burdens. How many others needed help but didn't know how to ask? When he finally returned to the depot, his heart pounded as he spotted Sharon Daniels, his boss, standing near the entrance. Her clipboard was in hand, her sharp eyes scanning the lot. Ethan parked and stepped out, bracing himself. "Walker," Sharon called out, her tone clipped. "You're late. Your GPS shows you went completely off-route for over 2 hours. Care to explain?" Ethan swallowed, the weight of the day pressing on his shoulders. "There was a situation on my route," he began, his voice calm but firm. "A little girl, her mom was hurt. I had to help." Sharon's stern expression softened slightly. "Hurt how?" Ethan recounted the events with quiet resolve, his words matter-of-fact despite the raw emotions threatening to surface. When he finished, Sharon was silent, her gaze steady but unreadable. Then, to his surprise, she nodded. "You did the right thing, Ethan," she said, her voice softer now. "This job isn't just about delivering mail. It's about community. People like Mia and her mom need someone who cares enough to act. And today, that was you." Ethan blinked, her words catching him off guard. "You're not mad." Sharon chuckled lightly. "Mad? No. Proud? Absolutely. Just don't make a habit of abandoning your route without letting me know first. Now, get back out there and finish up. And Ethan," she added, her tone carrying an unexpected warmth. "Good work." Relief washed over him, though it did little to lighten the weight he still carried. As he finished his route, Ethan paused before each door, staring at the bundles of mail in his lap. Each one represented a story he might never know, a life he might never touch. But today he had made a difference, and that was enough for now. The blazing midday sun turned the highway into a shimmering mirage, its heat searing through the windshield of the speeding red sedan. Daniel Harper's knuckles were white against the steering wheel, his grip so tight it seemed like he was trying to control not just the car but the chaos in his mind. The roar of the engine mingled with the pounding of his pulse, a rhythm of desperation that drove him forward. Behind him, the faint echo of sirens lingered in the distance, a haunting reminder that time was running out. His jaw clenched as sweat trickled down his temple, blurring his vision. The consequences of stopping were too great to face. He wasn't ready, couldn't afford to lose everything. Back in Willowbrook, the air in the police precinct was thick with urgency. Detective Sarah Morgan, her sharp eyes reflecting years of experience and an unyielding sense of duty, stood at the center of a bustling command room. The scent of stale coffee mixed with the hum of computer monitors as her team worked to piece together Daniel's flight path. "Pull every surveillance feed in a 10-mile radius," Morgan ordered, her voice crisp and commanding. Her reputation for meticulous attention to detail left no room for doubt. Red sedan, dented front bumper. Start at major intersections and work outward. Moments later, a junior officer flagged her down. "Got him," he said, pointing to a grainy image of a red sedan speeding past a traffic light, narrowly avoiding pedestrians. Heading west, another officer confirmed, tracking the car's trajectory across the map. Morgan's lips pressed into a determined line. Notify Highway Patrol, issue an APB, and set up roadblocks. He's not slipping through. The operation moved with mechanical precision, officers alerting neighboring jurisdictions and coordinating efforts. Time was against them, and they all knew the stakes. A man on the run, a shattered family left in his wake, and a little girl's desperate plea for justice hanging in the air like a ghost. Miles away, Daniel pulled into a gas station perched on the edge of nowhere. The battered car wheezed as it came to a halt, its engine steaming faintly in protest. He stumbled out, his disheveled appearance attracting curious glances from a handful of travelers. His steps were unsteady as he approached the counter inside, where a middle-aged attendant with sharp, scrutinizing eyes leaned lazily against the register. "Fill it up," Daniel muttered, his voice hoarse. The attendant nodded but didn't move immediately, his gaze lingering on Daniel's anxious frame. The darting eyes, the shallow breaths, the tremor in his hands. Something about him didn't sit right, a vague unease gnawing at the edges of the attendant's instincts. "You look like you've had a rough day," the attendant said casually, his tone laced with an undertone of suspicion. Daniel barely glanced up. "Just tired," he replied curtly, shoving a crumpled bill onto the counter. "And a pack of smokes." The attendant obliged, sliding the cigarettes over while his mind raced. His eyes flicked to the red sedan outside, its dented bumper triggering a memory. The police alert from earlier. White male, mid-30s, possibly armed. His heartbeat quickened, but he masked it with a practiced calm. As soon as Daniel exited, the attendant reached for the phone, dialing with quiet urgency. "This is Tom Hargrove, Highway 42 Gas and Go. The guy you're looking for, red sedan, dented bumper. He's here. Just pulled out." The hunt intensified. Patrol cars swarmed the highway like predators, closing in on wounded prey. Daniel noticed the flashing lights too late. "Damn it," he spat, slamming his foot on the gas. The sedan lurched forward, tires screeching as he veered onto the highway, weaving dangerously through traffic. His breathing grew erratic, a mix of fear and adrenaline clouding his judgment. Behind him, the chorus of sirens grew louder, a relentless reminder that his freedom was slipping away with every frantic turn. The radio chatter in the police cruisers buzzed with updates. Suspect heading westbound on Highway 42, requesting backup and clearance for spike strips. Detective Morgan's calm voice cut through the static. "No direct engagement unless absolutely necessary. We need him alive." Daniel's mind was a storm of panic and denial. Every twist of the steering wheel felt like a gamble. Every second a desperate attempt to outrun not just the law, but the truth he refused to face. He didn't see the spike strips ahead until it was too late. The sedan hit them at full speed. The tires exploded with a deafening pop, sending the car skidding wildly before it spun to a halt in a cloud of smoke. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the crackling of the overheated engine. Daniel stumbled out, his hands raised in surrender, his face a mask of desperation. "Don't shoot," he yelled, his voice cracking. "I didn't do anything." The officers surrounded him, their weapons steady, but their movements controlled. "Step away from the vehicle and get on the ground," one barked. Daniel hesitated, his eyes darting wildly before he collapsed to his knees. "You've got it all wrong," he shouted, his voice laced with a mix of anger and despair. "My wife, she's crazy. She's making this all up." The officers exchanged grim looks, their expressions unreadable as they cuffed him and led him to the waiting cruiser. His protest continued, echoing in the cold air, but they fell on deaf ears. Back at the Willowbrook precinct, Detective Morgan prepared for the next stage of the ordeal. The interrogation room was stark and clinical, the harsh fluorescent lights casting unforgiving shadows. As Daniel sat across from her, the weight of his lies and actions pressing down like a noose tightening around his neck, Morgan fixed him with a steely gaze. "You've got a lot to explain, Mr. Harper," she said, her tone unyielding. Daniel leaned back, his smirk a thin veneer of defiance. "It's all a big misunderstanding," he began, but Morgan wasn't buying it. Sliding a photo across the table, the shattered Harper home, Emily's battered face, she locked eyes with him. "Then explain this." Daniel's facade faltered for a split second, his jaw tightening before he masked it with another smirk. "She's clumsy," he said, his voice dripping with feigned concern. But Morgan wasn't fooled. "And your daughter? Her statement says otherwise. As the tension thickened, Morgan knew one thing for certain. Daniel's unraveling had only just begun. Daniel's confident smirk faltered as Detective Morgan's piercing gaze locked onto him. "She's just a kid," he snapped defensively, his voice tinged with frustration. "You know how kids make up stories. Emily's been poisoning her mind ever since the divorce. She's trying to turn my own daughter against me." For the next half hour, Daniel oscillated between charm and fury, his manipulative tactics on full display. He painted himself as a devoted father, weaving tales of his efforts to rebuild their family. "I planned a vacation for us," he said, his tone softening as if pleading for sympathy. "I bought Mia new clothes, school supplies, toys, everything she could need. I wanted her to feel loved, to know I'm still her dad, no matter what." He paused, his hands gesturing animatedly. "But Emily, she's bitter and vindictive. She threw it all away, literally. That's why you found those things in the trash." Morgan leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable, but her eyes never left his. "And the restraining order?" she asked, her tone cutting through his narrative like a scalpel. Daniel's face darkened. "That was a mistake," he replied, his words clipped. "She overreacted. I never meant to hurt her. She just pushes my buttons. I lose my temper sometimes, but who doesn't? That doesn't make me a bad person." Morgan's lips pressed into a thin line. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a cold, steady edge. "Losing your temper doesn't make you a bad person, Mr. Harper. But violating a restraining order multiple times? Attacking your ex-wife? Fleeing the scene while your daughter ran for help? That tells a very different story." Daniel's veneer of control began to crack. His hands slammed against the table. "I didn't attack her," he barked, his voice rising. "She started it. She's been trying to take me away from me since the day we split. What was I supposed to do? Just let her win?" Morgan remained composed, her calm demeanor unwavering. She slid a photo across the table. Emily's bruised face, her arm in a sling, and a medical report detailing her injuries. "This is what we're dealing with, Mr. Harper," she said evenly. "Would you like to explain how this happened?" Daniel's eyes darted to the evidence, his defiance flaring once more. "She probably did it to herself," he sneered. "Emily's always been dramatic, always playing the victim to make me look like the bad guy." Morgan's gaze hardened. "Dramatic?" she echoed icily. "So, you're saying she broke her own ribs, dislocated her shoulder, and gave herself a concussion?" Daniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "And your daughter, Mia?" Morgan pressed, her voice laced with steel. "Was she being dramatic when she ran for help? When she said she saw you attack her mother? She's a kid." Daniel roared, his voice shaking with frustration. "She doesn't understand what she saw. Emily's been feeding her lies for years, twisting her against me. It's all part of her plan to ruin me." Morgan leaned in closer, her tone now razor-sharp. "The only person ruining you, Mr. Harper, is yourself. Your ex-wife's injuries, your daughter's testimony, and the evidence from your home all tell the same story. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate, violent, and criminal. And you're going to answer for it." A tense silence gripped the room. Daniel's knuckles whitened as he clutched the chair, his gaze fixated on the damning evidence before him. When he finally spoke, his voice was a venomous hiss. "You don't know what it's like," he spat, "to build a life, a family, and have it all ripped away because of one mistake. Emily was supposed to stand by me, not turn me into the villain." Morgan's expression didn't waver. "Your actions turned you into the villain, Mr. Harper," she said coldly. "And now, the truth will do the rest." A week had passed since that harrowing day. In a sunlit hospital room, Emily sat on the edge of her bed, her arms still secured in a sling. Bruises lingered on her face, faint but undeniable. Despite her injuries, there was a quiet determination in her eyes, a fragile yet growing strength. Across the room, Mia clutched her stuffed rabbit. bouncing nervously on the balls of her feet as a nurse completed the discharge paperwork. "Are you ready to go home, sweetheart?" Emily asked softly, her voice steady yet tender. Mia hesitated, her small face shadowed by uncertainty. "I think so," she whispered, glancing at her mother. "But what if—" Emily reached out, taking her daughter's hand firmly but lovingly. "We're safe now," she said, her voice unwavering, "and we're going to stay that way." A knock at the door broke the moment. Ethan Walker stepped in, his warm smile a balm to the room's heavy atmosphere. "Need a ride?" he asked, jingling his car keys. "Mr. Ethan," Mia exclaimed, her face lighting up as she ran to him and wrapped her arms around his waist. Emily managed her first genuine smile in days. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "For everything?" "Don't mention it," Ethan replied, his tone gentle yet resolute. "Let's get you both home." The drive back to Willowbrook was quiet at first, the weight of returning to a place tainted by pain hanging over them. In the back seat, Mia clung tightly to her rabbit, her wide eyes gazing out at the passing scenery. Ethan broke the silence with a grin. "Hey, Mia," he began, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. "Did I ever tell you about the time a goose chased me on my delivery route?" "A goose?" Mia asked, her brow furrowing in disbelief. "Oh, yeah," Ethan said with mock seriousness. "Meanest bird I've ever met. I was just trying to deliver a package, and out of nowhere, this thing came at me, wings flapping, honking like it owned the place. I had to dive behind a hedge to escape." Mia giggled, the sound breaking through the tension like sunlight after a storm. "What did you do after that?" she asked. "I waited until it got bored and wandered off," Ethan admitted, laughing. "But to this day, I avoid that house." Even Emily chuckled, shaking her head. "I'm not sure if that's bravery or wisdom," she said, a hint of warmth returning to her voice. "Maybe a little of both," Ethan replied with a wink. By the time they turned onto Willow Lane, the mood in the car had lifted. Mia's laughter rang freely, and even Emily looked more at ease. But as they pulled into the driveway, Emily's breath caught. The house, once a sanctuary of warmth and safety, now felt like a battlefield. Though the broken furniture had been cleared and the shattered glass swept away, the scars of that night remained. Mia hesitated, her hand hovering over the car door handle. "Do we have to go back inside?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. Ethan turned to her, his tone gentle but firm. "It's just a house, Mia. What makes it a home are the people inside. And you and your mom. You're the heart of this place." Emily reached over, her hand resting on Mia's shoulder. "We'll make new memories," she said softly. "Happy ones." Together, with Ethan's help, they carried their belongings inside. The living room, though tidied, bore subtle traces of the chaos. A faint crack in the wall, a scratched floor. But as they stood there together, the promise of healing and new beginnings filled the space. And for the first time in weeks, it felt like home again. Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself as she scanned the living room, now a mixture of chaos and quiet. Broken picture frames and overturned furniture told a story she wished she could forget. "Are you okay?" Ethan's voice broke the silence, gentle but laced with concern. Emily nodded, though tears shimmered in her eyes, threatening to spill over. "It's just a lot," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Mia, her 8-year-old daughter, clutched her hand tightly, her small fingers a source of comfort and strength. "We'll be okay, Mommy," Mia said with the kind of determination only a child could muster. Emily knelt down, pulling Mia into a tight hug, her voice trembling but resolute. "Yes, we will," she said, her words a promise to her daughter and to herself. As the day unfolded, a quiet ripple of kindness spread through the neighborhood. People who had once been strangers began to show up, their small gestures carrying profound weight. An elderly couple from across the street arrived with a warm casserole, their faces lined with empathy. A woman from 2 doors down offered to babysit Mia anytime Emily needed a break. Each interaction brought a flicker of hope to Emily's weary heart. Ethan observed it all from the porch, his emotions a tangled web of relief and unease. For years, he had delivered mail to these homes, exchanging polite nods and brief greetings, never imagining the depth of compassion these neighbors could show when it mattered most. Emily joined him, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. She handed one to Ethan, her fingers brushing his briefly, a silent thank you. Leaning against the porch railing, she glanced at the neighbors bustling around. "I didn't expect this," she murmured, her voice tinged with disbelief. Ethan took a sip of his coffee, his gaze fixed on the street. "Sometimes people just need a reason to care," he replied. "And you've given them one." Emily turned to him, her expression softening but her tone resolute. "No, Ethan, you gave them one. If it weren't for you," her voice faltered and she shook her head, unable to finish the thought. "I don't even want to think about it." Ethan looked down at his mug, visibly uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what anyone would do," he said quietly. "No," Emily said firmly, her voice carrying the weight of her conviction. "You did what no one else did. You saw us, Ethan. You acted. You're our unexpected hero." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Emily and Ethan sat in the living room. The calm was almost foreign, but it felt like the first step toward healing. Mia was at the coffee table, her crayons scattered around as she worked intently on her drawing. Breaking the silence, Emily said, "I've been thinking about what's next." Ethan looked at her, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I can't stay here," she said, her gaze drifting to the room around them. "It's not just the house. It's the memories. Mia and I need a fresh start. I'm going to move closer to my parents, somewhere we can feel safe. And I'm starting counseling for both of us. It's time to deal with this, not just survive it." Ethan studied her, a deep respect shining in his eyes. "That sounds like a good plan," he said simply. Emily smiled faintly. "It's scary," she admitted, her vulnerability showing. "But staying here feels scarier." Ethan set his mug down and leaned forward slightly. "If there's anything I can do to help, let me know. Moving boxes, driving, whatever you need. You've got a whole community behind you now, Emily. Don't forget that." Her eyes glistened as she nodded. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." He smiled, a rare warmth breaking through his usual guarded demeanor. "You're strong, Emily. You and Mia both. You're going to be just fine." As Ethan walked back to his house that evening, a deep sense of fulfillment settled over him. The Harpers still had a long road ahead, but they were moving forward together. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. Not just for them, but for himself as well. The courtroom was alive with a low hum of murmurs as the trial of Daniel Harper began. The once respected businessman now sat at the defendant's table, his charm replaced by a steely, hollow expression. The Willowbrook community filled the gallery, their faces a mixture of curiosity and disdain. The case had peeled back the veneer of their idyllic suburb, revealing the darkness that had festered in its shadows. Emily Harper sat in the front row, her posture straight, but her hand resting protectively on Mia's small shoulder. Behind her, Ethan Walker sat, his steady gaze masking the nervous energy coursing through him. He had always been the quiet observer, the man who knew everyone's name but kept to himself. Now, he was a key witness in a case that carried the weight of justice for the Harpers. The prosecutor, Angela Carter, was sharp and commanding, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. "This case is about more than domestic violence," she began, her words heavy with purpose. "It is about control, fear, and the courage to break free. Emily Harper and her daughter endured unimaginable abuse at the hands of the defendant. Today, we will prove that beyond a shadow of a doubt." Over the following days, Carter meticulously presented the evidence. Photographs of the Harper home, marked by violence and chaos, told a harrowing story. Medical records detailed Emily's injuries: broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, a concussion. Each detail painted a vivid picture of the life Emily had fought to escape. When Emily took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. Her voice, though steady, carried the weight of years of pain and resilience. "I stayed for too long," she admitted, her eyes briefly meeting Mia's. "But when I saw the fear in my daughter's eyes, I knew I couldn't let her grow up thinking this was normal. That's when I decided to leave. And that's when he became even more dangerous." Mia's testimony was both heartbreaking and brave. Clutching her stuffed rabbit, she described the day her father's anger turned into violence. "He was so angry," she said softly. "Mommy told him to leave, but he wouldn't. He yelled and pushed her, and she fell. I ran to find Mr. Ethan because I was scared he would hurt her more." The raw emotion in the room was palpable. Even the most seasoned jurors seemed visibly moved by the courage of a child so young. Ethan's turn came toward the end of the week. As he approached the stand, he felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him, the gravity of his testimony settling over him like a heavy coat. "Please state your name and occupation for the court," Carter prompted. "Ethan Walker," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I'm a mailman." Carter guided him through his account, each question pulling the story from him piece by piece. He described Mia's desperate plea, the chaos at the Harper home, and finding Emily unconscious. "What made you decide to intervene?" Carter asked. Ethan hesitated, searching for the right words. "I couldn't just walk away," he said finally. Mia was terrified, and I could tell something was seriously wrong. It wasn't about my job or the rules. I just knew I had to help. As he continued, his voice grew stronger. The truth felt lighter now, easier to carry. By the time he stepped down from the stand, he felt a quiet sense of resolve. He had done his part, not just for the Harpers, but for himself. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as the defense attorney stepped forward, his sharp suit a testament to his precision, and the cold glint in his eye hinting at his readiness to dismantle Ethan's testimony. His voice carried an edge of skepticism that seemed to slice through the air. "You're a mailman, correct?" the attorney began, his tone dripping with condescension. Ethan met his gaze calmly. "Yes. Do you have any formal training in law enforcement or social work?" "No," Ethan replied, his voice steady. The attorney's lips curled into a faint smirk, sensing an opening. "So, would you say you're qualified to assess a domestic situation or determine someone's guilt?" Ethan paused, his eyes unwavering. "I wouldn't say I'm qualified to make legal judgments," he admitted, "but I know what I saw, and I know when someone needs help." The defense lawyer's smirk faltered for a split second before he pressed on, his words growing sharper as he attempted to paint Ethan as unreliable. He insinuated that Ethan's lack of professional training and his apparent concern for Mia had clouded his judgment. But Ethan stood firm, his voice unwavering. "I'm not here to make assumptions," he said. "I'm here to tell the truth." Despite the defense's attempts to undermine him, Ethan's sincerity resonated. His unshakable commitment to doing what was right left an impression, even as the courtroom tension thickened with every exchange. The evidence against Daniel Harper was unrelenting. Emily's injuries, Mia's heart-wrenching testimony, and corroborating accounts from Ethan and law enforcement painted a damning picture. Even Daniel's own testimony unraveled under cross-examination. When Carter, the prosecutor, pressed him about the restraining order and his repeated violations, Daniel's facade cracked. His voice rose, raw and defensive. "She was trying to keep me from my own daughter," he shouted, his tone tinged with desperation. "By hurting her," Carter shot back, her tone cold and cutting. Daniel's temper flared, and his composure crumbled. The courtroom watched as his true character surfaced, his outbursts undermining the narrative he had tried to spin. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty on all counts. Daniel Harper was sentenced to 10 years in prison for domestic abuse and child endangerment. The weight of the moment was palpable as the sentence was read. Emily closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek as she held Mia close. For the first time in years, a fragile sense of safety began to take root. The sun bathed Willowbrook in a soft, golden light as Ethan Walker resumed his usual route. The streets, lined with tidy homes and manicured lawns, seemed as serene as ever. Yet, to Ethan, they now carried an air of mystery. The events with the Harper family had opened his eyes to the hidden struggles behind even the most picturesque facades. Stopping at a familiar mailbox, Ethan adjusted his lighter-than-usual mailbag and placed a stack of letters inside. But today, the routine felt different. Every step, every delivery, carried a new significance, a reminder of the unseen lives he might touch. A few houses down, he reached a cheerful, modest home. The porch was adorned with potted plants, and a wind chime tinkled softly in the breeze. Mr. Ethan, he looked up to see Mia on the porch, waving enthusiastically. Her smile was radiant, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. Ethan smiled back and waved. "Good morning, Mia." Emily appeared at the doorway, a steaming mug of coffee in hand. "Ethan," she called, her voice warm. "Have time for a quick cup?" Ethan hesitated, glancing at his watch. For once, his route was ahead of schedule. "Sure," he said with a nod, stepping onto the porch. Inside, the house was filled with warmth and light, a stark contrast to the guarded tension that had once defined Emily's demeanor. The scent of freshly baked cookies mingled with the rich aroma of coffee. As they sat at the kitchen table, Emily's expression softened. "It's good to see you again," she said. "Life's starting to feel normal, or at least something close to it." "You seem lighter," Ethan observed. Emily nodded. "It's been a process. Counseling has helped us both, and being closer to my mom, that's made all the difference." Mia wandered in, her stuffed rabbit still in tow. "Mommy says you're a hero," she declared matter-of-factly, climbing onto a chair beside Ethan. Ethan chuckled. "I think your mom's the real hero," he said, glancing at Emily. "She's the one rebuilding everything, step by step." Emily's eyes glistened with emotion. "We wouldn't be here without you, Ethan. What you did reminded me that there are still good people in the world. People who care enough to act. That kind of courage ripples outward. It's inspired me to be stronger, to create something better for Mia." Ethan swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "it's the little things that make the biggest difference. A moment of kindness or just paying attention." As Ethan resumed his route, Mia's cheerful wave and Emily's gratitude lingered in his mind. The houses he passed no longer seemed like just stops on a map. They were stories waiting to be noticed, lives waiting to be touched. By late afternoon, the sun cast long shadows across the quiet streets. As Ethan walked the final stretch, his mailbag nearly empty, he paused to take in the familiar neighborhood. The events with the Harpers had left their mark, but they had also given him something invaluable, a renewed sense of purpose. With every step, Ethan vowed to remain vigilant and compassionate, because sometimes, even the smallest acts, a moment of listening, a choice to care, could ripple outward and change lives. And that, he thought, was a purpose worth carrying.